Welcome to BTR News with Scotty Reid. Tonight on this broadcast, I am joined by Mike Ross. And Mr. Ross is the Libertarian candidate aiming to reshape North Carolina's political future. And if he could win the gubernatorial race that he's in, and it's a crowded field, and it's a lot of money that's being raised by other candidates. But if he was to capture the governor's chair, that is definitely, a way to influence North Carolina's political future. Now, we hope to hear about his financial background, his passion for individual liberty, and his robust stance on transparent government, free market education, as well as police reforms, and much more. I know him personally, so full disclosure to the Black Talk Radio news audience, full disclosure, I met Mike. I was arrested protesting. Some of you probably heard some of those podcasts I did about it, but I was arrested, not really protesting. I was there as a member of the press covering a protest, which was about 8 or 9 people we'll classify as African-American, or in this system classify as Black. And they were being threatened with arrest, that if they didn't go with 300 feet from the front door of our county seat, our county courthouse, as well as county government is seated there as well, the powers that be, that's like headquarters central, and telling them that they had to leave a public sidewalk and go 300 feet away. And I knew that was incorrect. We had actually had a protest the year before. I held a press conference and challenged when a judge put that order in, and the judge backed down after he observed the peaceful protests, and he backed down on that. So here we are a year later, and here is, the sheriff's department trying to implement that order. That also goes against county ordinance. So make a long story short, Mr. Ross had been out there protesting with a group of people in his circle, and they were standing up for Joshua Rohr. And he was a veteran who was arrested by the Gastonia City Police. And that arrest is the subject of a federal lawsuit, but we're not going to get into the details of that lawsuit here, except for as it comes up in our conversation just about law enforcement and transparency in general. But Mike stepped up, and I hope he doesn't mind if I call him Mike, but Mike stepped up. I had a first appearance court, and I really didn't want people to come out, because a lot of people, I could have got a lot of people to show up, but I just wanted to do it quietly. But I did let certain people know, if they showed. I didn't really push for people to show, but 2 people showed up. That was Pam Morgenstern, who is a registered Democrat and does work with the Democratic Party here in Gaston County, and Mike Ross, who is with the Libertarian Party. And those 2 showed up to my first appearance court. And so definitely he has shown me that he's serious about First Amendment issues. But I just wanted to give that full disclosure because I know him personally. He lives in the same county that I live in. So before we get started with our Q&A session, let me go ahead and just let everybody know, I'm doing some new things with Black Talk Radio News and other programs that we will produce. So like, I'm an engineer for this program, and I'm the host, so I don't have nobody helping me. And then, just drawing from experience of past doing live radio shows, people will call in to disrupt the program, or, they drone on and on and on, and it kind of messes up the flow of the program. So what we're going to try something different. The way that I could screen calls is by just allowing you to call a telephone number and leave a voicemail comment that we can play on air. So if you have any questions for Mr. Mike Ross tonight, who again is the Libertarian gubernatorial candidate for North Carolina governor, if you have any questions, call 1-704-218-9194. That's 704-218-9194. 994. So we're gonna try this and see how it works, because I'm also able to read a transcript. And if you cussing us out or using vulgar language, then I know I shouldn't play that call on air. So keep it family friendly. Y'all know we try to do conduct this program as a family friendly platform. All right, so without further ado, I want to bring Mike in and just allow him to introduce himself in his own words to our audience. Mike, are you there, and are you hearing us okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Scotty, thanks for having me on the program today. So my name is Mike Ross. I am a Libertarian running for governor of the state of North Carolina. But I actually, before I get a chance to take it to Robinson and Stein, I have to get past a Libertarian in March. So for the first time in, I think, about 20 years, the Libertarian Party of North Carolina actually has a primary, and it is open to unaffiliated voters. So, if you're unaffiliated, which is the majority of North Carolinians, you can vote in whatever primary you want. And if you're uninspired by Robinson and Stein, I hope you would come help me win in the Libertarian primary, so that I can bring a voice fighting for the liberty of regular people before the general public in 2024, and hopefully shake some waves and make some change in areas that I think are important, like government transparency, police and criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, and quite frankly, the economy, because a lot of North Carolinians of all backgrounds are really suffering under the current kind of bipartisan regime of the last 20 years, where everything keeps getting more expensive, yet the quality of everything keeps seeming to going down, and life's getting harder, but they keep taking more and more. So that's kind of where I'm running. And you mentioned it, I'm more of an activist, not a politician. But some libertarians that I respected really asked me, and they said, Mike, we need an activist to run and represent the party. And I said, okay, I'll do it if you let me put forward a platform that I think will resonate with North Carolinians. And here I am today, Scotty, on your program.
Now, before we get into the specifics of your campaign, a little bit about the North Carolina Libertarian Party, some news that I think is worth mentioning. And I think, my abolitionist listeners out there that carry over from New Abolitionist Radio, and actually that might be coming back as a program, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, y'all might be interested to know that and I'm gonna let Mike spill the news, but you got the Libertarian Party to co-sign on to a resolution that calls for an end of slavery and involuntary servitude here in the North Carolina Constitution. Now for those that don't know, the North Carolina Constitution actually does abolish slavery. It says slavery will be abolished, period, in the sentence. Then in the new section, it says involuntary servitude as punishment for crime. So like in other states, here we have people playing with semantics and using words that mean the same thing in the context of what we're talking about. So what is slavery if it cannot be described as involuntary servitude? So I feel like the authors of that section of the North Carolina Constitution was intentionally, like many others in all the other states, intentionally allowing a loophole for slavery to continue in the state of North Carolina through its criminal justice system and being practiced in the prisons in North Carolina, be they private or public. Mike, what moved you to speak to your Libertarian Party members about that resolution and about that issue here in North Carolina?
Yeah, absolutely. So it came about when you shared with me, I think I saw it on Facebook, where I think Democrats in North Carolina, I think it was House Bill 822, if my memory serves me, that sought to just fix our constitution, fix our state constitution, and pull out, a slavery loophole that basically allows, prisons to force slavery upon the people in their custody. I mean, that's what it is, so I brought before that, and our policy people, right? We've got some team within the party, the people who really get into the legislature and kind of the process of all that. And they said that one, some procedural issue is kind of a hurdle. So I thought, well, how can we make kind of a bigger statement? So I'm actually on the platform committee of the Libertarian Party of North Carolina. And I can tell you, every Libertarian I've ever met is 100% against slavery. But we actually wanted to take a big step as a third party and say, hey, we've got the two two halves of the uni-party kind of debating all of these issues. And when we kind of agree with one of them, we like to put our hat in the ring. So after talking to all the libertarians, we're going to look and see if there's possibly a place to get it into our platform before our body in our 2024 convention. And in the meantime, if we can get the legislature, either side, House or either side of the legislature, as well as either group, right, Republicans or Democrats, to move something forward, we will call out our support the same way we do for any legislation that we support. Having across the state, all the libertarians call their representatives, say support this bill, and we've done that in the past with some legislation that Republicans have moved, some legislation that Democrats move. If we like the legislation and it's libertarian in principle, we're going to rally behind it. But that's one that I think has been pretty unanimous. Every libertarian within the party, from the chair, all of the executive committee, and every just member that I've talked to, the idea of that slavery is backdoor still in our Constitution is pretty abhorrent. And we're all on board for trying to do anything we can as a small third party to push us in that direction. Hopefully, the Republicans and Democrats can get that one done, since they have the power right now and could do it like that. But for some reason, here we are, still in 2023 dealing with slavery in North Carolina.
All right, please be sure to keep me updated on those things you mentioned within the party framework, like getting that introduced at your 2024 convention. All right, Mike. So let's jump into your campaign. First, can you tell us about your journey or background in finance? I know you're a small business owner in the finance area. And so can you tell us about your journey and your background in finance and becoming a gubernatorial candidate with a focus on individual liberty, which is the central theme of the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got started in finance when I was a 20-year-old kid. I'm 40 now, 41 later this week. So I got my start there and kind of worked my way up the corporate gig. And I realized there were some things I like about the financial industry and some things I didn't like about it. So about 6 years ago, I left kind of the corporate world, started my own firm called My Money Coach. And what I realized is that the industry, by and large as a whole, works really well for rich people. And I kind of hit this point in my career where I had a minimum client size of $10 million working for Vanguard. And I joked, I said, all I do is help the rich get richer. And the problem is the way the industry was structured, it's really incentivized that, that's how you make money, right? Is helping people who have money. So my wife jokes that it was my midlife crisis, but I said, I'm going to do something different. I got, a couple of rich clients to pay the bills, but I'll work with anybody, people who have like no money and they can afford to invest $25 a week, something like that. Cause that's what I'm passionate about. Because if you really want to elevate people out of poverty, you have to teach them steps that are easy to understand and empower them to do that. And a lot of times there's so many barriers to getting out of that. I said, how can I, as a small business owner, focus on that? So I have some friends that are pastors, some of my activism that about, like I've got pastors, and within the churches, there's a lot of times that bad investments go around in church groups. It happens in white churches, black churches, like, the Iraqi dinar and all of these things that kind of come around as get rich quick schemes. And most of the time parishioners are getting burned. So, a couple of pastors have kind of flown me in to introduce me to their group. And I've gotten a lot of people who, again, they're starting small, 10, 20 bucks a week, whatever they can, but they're investing. And 20 years down the line, by participating, I'm hoping to make a real impact in their lives. And that's what makes me, happy about the fact that at the end of the day, I manage money, right? And help people plan for things. But being able to kind of, help people who otherwise wouldn't be helped is kind of been my passion. That's kind of where I saw, my political activation, I guess you could say, because I was fine just being a homeschool dad, a small business owner, and just living my life. And then I started seeing this trend of my local county and town governments really abusing citizens left and right, ignoring the First Amendment, ignoring the Fourth Amendment, and just really kind of getting ridiculous between the Joshua Aurora case. And I know, the Lipscomb case. There's so many cases in Gaston County and Gastonia that just demonstrate that there's a real disdain for some basic civil liberties that we are supposed to have protected by the Constitution of the United States that our local government was trampling over. So, we had a bunch of rallies about that activism.
As well as the North Carolina Constitution, I might add, and if you'll allow me to interject, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
If you look at the North Carolina Constitution, I'm not going to pull it up right now, but I always challenge people to do their own research. But its language on First Amendment speech rights, that civil liberty, is actually stronger than the federal U.S. Constitution. And it also mentions that any law, whether passed by the legislature or ordinance passed somewhere that infringes upon, the First Amendment, collective rights, freedom of the press, freedom of citizens to, speak out, that any law is null and void on arrival. The North Carolina Constitution, I'm paraphrasing, but it really goes that far.
As it should, right? At the end of the day, if we're not free to speak, then we're not free. Free speech and is really the root for how we fought for everything through the civil rights movement. If we didn't have free speech, none of the advancements that we've had as a society that benefit regular people would have been possible, because those in power would snuff them out if they had the ability to just shut us up legally. The problem is, as technology grows, you kind of have this quasi relationship where the social media companies are working with the government to do that. When you have a cop, a police shooting or something like that, they will go out of their way to try to prevent that from spreading. So it's really a dangerous, slippery slope. Sometimes there's good news, right? With your arrest, they dropped the charges. You never should have been charged or put in cuffs in the first place. But sometimes they do that. But other times, how long does it take to get body cam footage in the state of North Carolina, right? That's something.
And how much does it?
What?
And how much does it cost? You should add that, because you have firsthand knowledge of that whole process with Joshua Ward's case. So please speak on those details.
Yeah, when it comes to that, the way I see it is within the First Amendment, there's a lot of things here, and some people may get on me with this, but the way the legislation is in North Carolina surrounding body cam footage, I personally think that is every North Carolinian's personal responsibility to record every interaction they have with law enforcement for multiple reasons. One, if there is anything that goes wrong and an officer in the state of North Carolina violates your rights in any way, right? And sometimes it's blatant, sometimes I've had women that said, hey, I was pulled over by a state trooper and they propositioned me, right? Just something as simple as that. If you are abused by your government and your government is holding evidence that you paid for, it should be as simple as saying, hey, I appear on this footage. Can I have it? And our legislature, the way they aligned our body cam laws in this state is completely backwards. The default is no, you can't have it. And you have to petition and force a judge to say yes. It should be completely backwards. If the police think that they have a reason why this body cam footage should not be put out there, maybe it contains somebody who's an active murderer that they're searching for, whatever it may be, they should have to take those relevant facts before a judge and present why it is essential to block it. I would still rather say just release it, but the default should be if someone on body cam footage asks for it, they're on it. Give it to them and make it cheap and easy, because it cost Joshua almost $30,000 to get that footage released. What regular person who can be the subject of just day-to-day
a bad taxpayers' property, and
we paid for it.
Was a other city at the time.
Yeah, it's just
from a press perspective, with me being the president of Black Talk Media Project, my stance on it is that any citizen should be able to put in a FOIA request and pay a reasonable fee to get that footage or any other document. They shouldn't have to go before a judge. Again, we're talking about public property. At the end of the day, that is what a police recorded on their body cam, whatever, whether it's in the courthouse on their, security system. That's all a matter of public. It's financed by the public. It should always be accessible to any member of the public.
Well, and look at the other issues that we have in Gaston County with the First Amendment, where, not only with Joshua's situation and the situation with what happened to you, but as of July 1st, our county courthouse, you can't bring a cell phone
Right.
into the courthouse, which forget the basic constitutional issue where that's supposed to be a house of justice, where we can go and witness the way our government officials are treating the public, where, if they're saying that your neighbor did something wrong and you want to go there and witness, well, what evidence do they have that my neighbor did something wrong? The fact that they won't even let you go in there to record things, I have some issues there, but it's gotten so bad, like you can't even bring your phone in. What if I was in a courtroom. What if I want to know what time it is, or if I have a business call to make? Like there's ways you can, to me, I don't even think they should be trying it. I think that the entire idea of keeping recording away from government officials is fundamentally abhorrent to the First Amendment, right? I mean, there's been enough case law that filming officers has been deemed protected freedom of the press by independent journalists. I mean,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, there's case law on that. And I think that until the time exists that we are protected to obtain that public property, if it contains evidence of us being wronged by our government, I think the only responsible thing to do is to record every interaction, because you're not going to get your hands on that body cam footage. Who knows if they're going to edit it, mute it, or anything else. So make sure to have a copy. If it was as transparent as I would like to see it, I'd like to tell my fellow North Carolinians that you wouldn't have to do that. But until that time, know when to keep your mouth be quiet, know when to ask for lawyers and not incriminate yourself, and turn on that camera. So anything that's done can be used to protect you, because they're not going to turn it over willingly. But if I'm elected, I'll make sure that happens on day one. And if the legislature gives me a hard time, I will, I'll work individually and just start releasing the footage if I have to as governor, and be a real thorn in their side. But we got to fix it. It's so against the people. And all it does is protect those in power. And I think anything that structurally harms the people and protects those in power, we don't need to reform it. We need to dismantle it.
All right, so let's move on. You've often stated, and I saw it posted on your website. No, actually, I saw it on Facebook, like a motto of yours or a quote from you, but it said that government causes more problems than it solves. How does this belief shape your policy proposals, particularly those about transparent government, which you were just speaking on with the First Amendment, and the role of the governor?
Yeah. So the reason I say government causes more problems than it solves is a lot of times I think the heart and the intention of the politicians is in the right place, right? Where you see something is wrong and you choose to do something. The problem is that every time you choose to do something or implement something, it's going to live on and evolve and change, because that's at the federal level, at the state level, any kind of programs that we come in. And often what starts out with good intentions ends up just creating more problems. And in many cases, it's quite frankly, not the rich people who are burdened by all of these things that come in. So what I want to look at is, most governors are talking about all these things they want the government to do. Hey, we're going to start doing this. I really want to look at what is the government currently doing now at the state level that is making things more difficult for North Carolinians to, exhibit their liberty and suffer or live through prosperity, right? Because at the end of the day, when you look at a lot of the things that regular people care about, right, there's certain things. If you live in an area with high crime, maybe you worry about crime, right? Like, hey, am I going to get mugged? Whatever it may be. If you live in various areas, the government tries to step in and solve all of these problems. But the way they try to solve it is never really economically sound. A lot of times they throw money at it, in most cases in a very unaccountable and very people get mad with the harsh words, but I'm just going to say it because I think it's the truth, Scotty. I mean, they do it in corrupt ways.
Right? Give it to us straight.
Yeah, I mean,
it's tough on this network.
It's corrupt, right? Like you look at Gastonia, where Gastonia's got this big issue going on now with the Fuse district, where they're putting millions of dollars into these pet projects of the politicians, Well, things like roads in basic neighborhoods, they're like, oh, hey, we need a $75 million bond. So put all our residents in debt to do the roads, but we're working in this development that helps out, the land developers and all of these special interest groups that darn well are kicking back money to all the politicians. And that happens at the state level all the way down. So I think one of the things that we need the government to stop doing is picking favorites in the economy, because ultimately regular people are suffering. Like even people who are, not making enough where the federal income tax, right? Where right now, some people joke where, some people say, hey, half the population is not paying income taxes. And they're like, how do we get everybody to pay income taxes? I'm like, hey, we're halfway there. How do we get people to not have their income taxed? Because a tax historically has always been something that you use to disincentivize something, right? When New York is like, hey, people are drinking too many sodas and getting fat. Well, we're going to tax the sodas. So you got to get little sodas, or we're going to tax you if you buy a big one. Why the heck are we taxing labor? We should want Americans and North Carolinians to go out there, be entrepreneurs, to work, to build wealth, to pass that on through their generations and build up this country. And instead, the government's like, hey, we want money so bad for our pet project, we're just going to take something off the top. So, but even those who are not part of the income tax, things that flow through, the gas tax hits every layer of
I was just about to say, Mike, I was just about to interject and say, even a homeless person pays taxes when they collect some change on a corner, or however they get some charity from the people, and they walk into McDonald's to order from the dollar menu. Well, it's not much for $1 on there anymore, but they order something from the dollar menu. There's a tax on that purchase of food. So everybody is taxed. And real quick, you mentioned Mark Robinson as one of your opponents in this race. Mark Robinson representing the Republican Party, the GOP, and who is North Carolina's current lieutenant governor. But he had sent out a tweet where, he's usually just regurgitating partisan talking points that I've heard before, but he mentioned, tried to take a dig at President Biden about inflation, but talked about it in a way that then translated into, but North Carolina Republicans is putting more money into people's pockets in causing prosperity. And I tweeted back at him, and I was like, you know what? I was like, and I think he mentioned something about tax relief. And I was like, you know what? I live in a Republican GOP-controlled county. Every single county commissioner is a Republican, and they just went up $700 on our property taxes. Another person at my mom's church said they went up on $1,000 on hers, and then another friend who lives in Cramerton, they just went up $2,000 on her. So I'm like, y'all, they just went up on our taxes. And the minimum wage is still $7.25. So where's all this relief you bringing the working class people, Mark Robinson? So
it's lies, man.
What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
I mean, it's lies, Scotty. I mean, at the end of the day, you hit the nail on the head, right? Because as a libertarian, people don't really know what box to put me in. They're like, oh, you're a conservative. Oh, you're a progressive. I'm a libertarian. At the end of the day, I'm a libertarian. And sometimes my views align with people who label themselves that way. But at the end of the day, Republicans claim to care about lowering taxes on working class people. But you hit the nail on the head. Every single person who owns property in Gaston County got somewhere between a 30 to 50% increase in real dollars year over year. Look what they paid last year and what they're going to have to pay this year. It went up 30 to 50%, whether you're in $1 million house in one of these nice golf course neighborhoods, or whether you're in an old mill house that a few years ago you could get under 100,000. They're going for like 250,000 in some of these cases. And to people like my mother, right? My mother's on Social Security. She's in her 70s. Right. If it was not for Social Security, I would basically just have to make sure that I'd be taking care of my mom. She took care of me. That's what I would do. But I know that there are, thousands of North Carolinians that are in that situation that maybe don't have a son or a daughter that's willing and able to help them out. And that property tax increase, and Gaston County doesn't want to talk about it, but a lot of cities are dealing with problems like homelessness. That is going to create people losing their homes. Just that tax increase someone in Gaston County is going to experience homelessness simply because these low tax, save you on your tax Republicans are lying. Now, I think the Democrats, it's not like they would have given tax cuts either, but I think we need to look at things like that and really look at these taxes that are smothering working class people. I would like to get rid of every single one that we could, find ways to do it, whether it's through use taxes, ending the corporate loopholes. That's one of my big issues, and one of the places I have a lot of alignment with a lot of progressives on, which they kind of have some, they say, hey, you're all for lowering taxes. My problem is the structure of it, right? The way we're doing things is, yeah, we may be taxing some of these corporations, but look at this sweetheart deal VinFast got, right? It's a Vietnamese electric car manufacturing company. And look at the actual impact, because both the Republicans and Democrats of the state are bragging about this like it's some kind of good deal for you, me, and all other North Carolinas. And it's total nonsense, Scotty. We gave them billions of dollars in corporate welfare. We're building roads specifically for them that we're going into and taking North Carolinians' property, right? Someone who they may have had that land in their family for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to put a road there to connect to this factory that we're giving billions of dollars of your money to just to bring them to the state, I'm sorry, that's un-American. I think that, getting rid of things, and, I know we'll talk about it in other ones, but like ending immunity of all types. Like that's one of the things we need to stop giving these big corporations immunity, right? Because maybe they're paying some taxes, but if they have an environmental spill, they're limited, in some of these cases where the government's providing liability protection to big corporations. And if there's some kind of economic or health event
for the cleanup,
right? Who pays for that? Well, ultimately we are, if they don't do that. And I think that's
so
where we have to flip it. You got to go after them, and that's where, even though I'm a libertarian, believe in low taxes, I think you got to do it pragmatically and say, the taxes that are impacting the poor, right? Like I'm middle class, I'm not rich, but I'm middle class. So, if there's a tax on milk, it doesn't impact me. But I think of that single mother who has 3 kids, when the price of milk goes from $3 to $5 a gallon, because of all of the taxes, not even counting inflation, which is the most regressive and hidden tax of them all, because that one's, but there's only so much I can do. I can't end the Fed as governor of North Carolina, but I can certainly push for an audit. And if they audit it, they'll have to end it, because it's at least that's my opinion. But
I want to circle back to something. You just mentioned the poor people, like you mentioned your mom on Social Security. So like my mom retired within the past, 5-10 years, I'm not sure exactly, but I know a lot of other people in the community that I live in on Old Highway 27, which is a historically Black community. And you talk about land being in possibly somebody's family and homes 100 years. I would say it would even go back possibly 125 years with some of the families that live up in that area. It's an unincorporated area of Gaston County. But take a person like my mom who is who has inherited land from her father and who's going to will it to her children, but she's on a fixed income, right? Still got a mortgage payment. And has to pay property taxes. And not to mention, we're in an unincorporated area and we really don't even use any services, in turn that the government provides. And so, $700 is a lot to someone on a fixed income. And what this leads to now, she did not have, like you said, your mom didn't have you as a son, but if my mom didn't have me, my brother, my sister, my children, some of their children, you know what I'm saying? And if we wasn't chipping in to help pay the property taxes, someone who doesn't have family like that will lose that land. It'll be taken by the state. By the county. And, this is an issue that's nationwide, as I have a friend who is who has campaigned in Baltimore. But when you look at what we typically call, not urbanization, but what do they call it when they're moving all out,
gentrification?
Gentrification.
Yeah.
Right. Well, a lot of the gentrification is the way he explained it was tax foreclosure. People just simply no longer able to pay the taxes and they go into foreclosure. And that's like a tremendous transfer of wealth from the people to the government. I mean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's been an issue with big cities for a long time, and I think that
in rural areas like where I live as well, though.
Yeah, it's been a big issue in big cities, and it's branching out, right? Like because this big cities got away with it for so long, the rural areas are like, hey, we'll try this too, and it's really worse than that, right? Because in some cases, it's going back to the government themselves, who's you don't pay the tax bill, but in a lot of cases, and this is why one of the big issues. And if any big money comes to attack me, I'll tell you right now who it's going to come from in this state. It's going to come from the developers, right? These large property developers that are work operating across the country. They have no vested interest in any of these communities, but they'll look at it and say, hey, you know what? There's 500 delinquent properties in Gaston County. We're just going to pay them all, because if they pay your property taxes for 3 years and you don't pay them back with interest, they can take your property. A private developer, right? So they're able to do this in mass, and they're like, hey, I just pick a place on a map. We got billions of dollars that we got through the Fed printing money and taking advantage of all these things that are basically corporate welfare for real estate investment trusts. But they buy up large blocks of land when it's available, and if not, they buy it through tax liens. They get these tax liens, they acquire the property, and then without caring about the neighborhood, without caring about the impact, they're like, we're going to rent this out for as much as we can. And that's happened to large parts of Gaston County, right? Where neighborhoods that were affordable to people 5 years ago, you have this corporate money that's coming in with these big corporate special interests, buying up the land, buying up houses through harassing phone calls or whatever else they do. And they get them there.
Driving up the taxes with their inflated property values, because some of these houses don't even sit on a quarter of an acre. I mean, it's like a little plot. And then you didn't stack these houses close together and you listing them for like 300,000, 500,000. And then I'm looking at the cheap materials that you're using, because I used to work construction. These aren't even brick houses.
Well, the thing that protects that scheme is the government. The only reason that actually works, the only reason that they're able to pull this off is because we can get in the way, right? Where when you have the economic pressures, right? Where you have corporate money flowing in, buying all the houses in an area, right? And then they're like, hey, we're going to set market price for rent. We're going to drive up the rent prices and collect it in. So as they're doing that, there's a real simple solution. But a lot of people don't like it, and the government certainly doesn't. And that comes with loosening zoning, right? Why are prices going up? It's because we have a supply problem. These big corporate owners are buying up all the property, setting the prices way up high, and they're okay if nobody comes and rent it because they own 1,000 of them. So if 2 of them are sitting vacant, it's a rounding error on their balance sheet, but that's 2 houses that someone might need. Where if they allow us to build housing, and, take you, for example, right? This is something that I look at and I think, there's a lot of situations where you may have like a matriarch or a patriarch of the family who has their land, has their property, maybe it's paid for, so they're just dealing with that. But they want to supplement their income a little bit, right? Where Social Security is maybe not enough. The ability to like put a tiny house on your property or something small there, if we were allowed to do that, right? Just, hey, I'm going to build another one. Now, I can rent this to my nephew. I can rent this to my friend. Now that's helping me, but and it's also helping the housing crisis, right? If all of a sudden 1,000 people in Gaston County did that and built a tiny house on their property, what happens to rent? What happens to everything? Comes down.
One of my cousins actually did that lives next door, because it's like up in that area, we're mostly all related. This historic community. And I mentioned that it's unincorporated.
Yeah, so they don't get you too bad on zoning.
Oh, exactly. And he put a tiny home right in front of the property that was once his grandfather's, who's passed on and passed it down. And so my other cousin is actually rehabbing that house. And the county did condemn the house that was sitting there, but he's been rehabbing it. But my other cousin also plopped a tiny home down. Ain't nobody bothered him because we live in an unincorporated area. And I would like to actually keep it that way.
Well, yeah, but the way I see it is I think it's great that your family has freedom and liberty. Why doesn't everybody? Right? You know, if you lived a half a mile down the road and you had the exact same family dynamics and the exact same financial situation, what right does the government say to do this? I personally think, well, if you look at the economics of it, it sure helps their developer friends that everybody can't solve that problem, and that, you know, churches can't be like, hey, I've got, you know, a big pool of money and some excess land. I'm going to build 10 of these tiny houses and try to like, none of us can do any of that because the government wrote all of these restrictive zoning ordinances. And that's the kind of thing that I look at it. I want to look through, what are we doing in North Carolina that when you follow the money and where this happens, it's ultimately something that is harming the general public to the benefit of some group of special interests.
Okay, Mike. So we're over the halfway mark, and I actually missed a break. But I'm gonna go ahead and take it now and just let people know that you are listening to Black Talk Radio News with Scotty Reid, which is part of blacktalkradionetwork.com. is where you can find us online. If you would like to support this show, you can do so by giving to my favorite charity. In full disclosure, I am the founder and president of the Black Talk Media Project. You can go to blacktalkradionetwork.com. You'll see a donate tab in the menu, and just click on that, and you can make a donation to the North Carolina nonprofit Black Talk Media Project. All right, so again, we're talking with Mr. Mike Ross, who is running for governor, but as he stated, he's actually in the primary. North Carolina does have an open primary to where you can just, when you go to vote on that day, during primaries, you just tell them which ballot you want. You can't vote in all three or four, or however many it's going to be. Usually it's just been three here in Gaston County: Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarian Party. So a lot of people may not know that. It doesn't matter how you're registered. You don't have to register as a Libertarian to vote in their primary or any of the other parties. You can just tell the lady or the gentleman when they ask you which primary you want to vote in. I think that's great about North Carolina, that it gives us that choice. If
you're unaffiliated, if you're a registered Republican or a Democrat, you can.
Right.
Yeah,
you're
semi-open.
Right. If you're unaffiliated. Thank you for correcting me, Mike. Thank you for correcting me. All right. Again, if you have any questions before we come to the end of the broadcast for Mr. Candidate Mike Ross, running for North Carolina governor, you can leave it in the voicemail bag at 1-704-218-9194. That's 704-218-9194. Now, we're going to move on. Let's touch on education. I've never really heard this term before, but let's discuss your vision for free market education, because some critics, I'm sure, will argue that completely removing state influence could lead to disparities in education quality. Might even, be programming children with misinformation, which I think a lot of them are already, but that's neither here nor there. But how do you plan to ensure every child gets an equal and quality education in a free market model, which I've never really heard anyone describe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of have to agree with you. I think that that's one of the problems with the public school system now is we're not getting always factual information, but certainly not good outcomes, right? When I look at the system, we spend about $11 billion of North Carolinians' tax dollars on education. $11 billion. It's almost a third of our budget is going into this one big piece, education, right? And the whole system is really, if you haven't dug into our education policy, where we have the education lotto, right? The lotto helps education. It's BS. Here's how it works. The General Assembly will set a budget, right? $10 billion that we're going to spend on education. If the lotto brings in $1 billion, if it was truly an education lotto, we'd have $11 billion for education, the 10 that they allocated plus this billion that the lotto comes in. But the way it works is a clawback system. So if the education lotto pulls in $1 billion, they drop the baseline budget to $9 billion. So you still only have that initial pool. So even if you pulled in $10 billion just from the lotto, all that would do is free up the original $10 billion for the politicians in Raleigh to spend on whatever the heck they want. So the education lotto is not really benefiting us. So I say, rather than have these systems that are upheld state down, look at it this way. How many students do we have? Our Constitution of the state requires that we provide for education. So take that number, divide it by the number of students. And I'll just tell you this, right? You live here in Gaston County. The number comes out to about $10,000 per student that we spend on education in North Carolina. There's a lot of good private schools around here that you could send your kid to for less than $10,000 a year. I know, because before I homeschooled, I sent my kid to one, even though I was still paying for that. So the problem is that you look at the rich. Guess what? The rich can already send their kids to whatever school they want to. They can homeschool them. They can send them to the most expensive college prep school. But you go to a low-income neighborhood where the public school is in many cases not very good, and they're not getting good outcomes and not preparing people to leave and become contributors.
And some would say they're not actually getting it for 10,000 per child, because one of the problems I've heard over the years from the educators is a lack of funding. So where is the money going actually?
Well, my plan would fix it. And, the Republicans are pushing this whole, school choice thing. And I do think that it could be a step in the right direction, but I think it has so many slippery slopes that it could just lead to a government takeover of all non-public education currently, where now they're telling the homeschools and the religious schools, and now they're telling them what to do. So I think it should be as simple as, Scotty, you got 2 kids? Great. You got a $10,000 pool for each of them. Find the best education option for you. If it's the public school, great. You go there, that $10,000 goes to your local public school. If it's a private school that you can send your kids to, great. The money goes there. If it's a teacher who lives in your neighborhood, who's like, hey, I think this whole system is bad. I want to start a micro school and teach my kids in my community. And they say, hey, I've got 15 kids. Well, at 10,000, now you got a teacher who's got $150,000 baseline to run that micro school. And you mean to tell me that someone who lives in the neighborhood, who like existing educators with years of experience, they don't have that option in this system. A teacher can't go out and be an entrepreneur and make a good living for themselves. If you force them to compete with the free market, those types of things will pop up, where you have a good educator who says, you know what, I want to go invest. Because there's people who will look at things and say, you know what, this community is underserved. I'm going to go make an investment of my time, talent, and energy. And if you can align the financial incentives in a way that can provide for an equitable outcome there, I truly think that North Carolinians will ultimately solve that way better than the government's public school system can, which is why I don't want to abolish the public school system. I just want them to have to compete, where if you as a parent say, hey, you're spending $10,000 a year on my kid, and you're supposedly, and there's a much better education option that I could get done for $10,000, you let me allocate that money instead of you in Raleigh, or instead of you on the Gaston County School Board. And if you want to have your kid learning, having a real religious traditional education, they can. If you want to have a really progressive, educate your kids kind of the way they would, but give the parents the power, not some bureaucrat.
One quick follow-up question, because we do need to try to move it along.
Sorry.
I'm not trying to keep you on here all night, but is there currently, like you mentioned, you're a homeschooler, and I've often talked to my daughter about homeschooling, my grandchildren, or my daughters about homeschooling grandchildren. And there are, actual networks that I'm aware of that I've, actually met these people through Black Talk Radio and interviewing them about, their education solutions and the things they were doing through their homeschooling network. But in North Carolina, for example, I didn't hear you mention this, but if I'm homeschooling, shouldn't I get a $10,000 up to $10,000 tax exemption?
Yes. Yes. I mean, and with my plan, here's the way I envision it. Because as a homeschooler, right, I have some core subjects, right? Math, science, English, history, like we cover those because it's there. My son's interested in technology, so he takes a coding class once a week. I pay for that out of pocket. But that's an educational type of thing. If you want to send your kid to, maybe your kid's into construction and welding, and you've got a teenager who you want to go send to like a private like class to learn how to do woodworking. Why is anybody other than the parent choosing how those dollars that are supposedly being spent for their child, right? Educate your kids and get rid of this one size fits all model. That's my big problem with these systems is not every kid learns the same. Having a system that will allow educators to work with your children and really who I think benefits the most from my plan is teachers, right? Because right now the teachers don't get paid anywhere near enough. And there's people in the district that are making 3 or 4 times what the teachers are making, and they don't provide any value to the education of the children. And if you force the public school system to compete there, I think a lot of those things are going to go away, and they're going to have to raise teacher pay because teachers are going to realize, hey, I could just take 10 students, have a class size of 10, run it out of my house, make more money than the public schools do.
Run it online. I mean, during COVID, everything was online based. So why can't they continue using those same tools? They can. Absolutely. That's how some of the people that I know who homeschool, they definitely have incorporated technology. You'll be a fool not to, but I do need to move on.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the topic of police reforms because you have a dual focus, which is on your campaign website. It talks about protecting the police and protecting the public. So how do you reconcile the need for higher police salaries with ending practices like qualified immunity and civil asset forfeiture?
Yeah. So I tried to solve with my platform. I thought, at the end of the day, I'm running for the independent North Carolinians, right? Libertarian Party, we're a smaller party, but there's a lot of
unaffiliated in North Carolina.
The unaffiliated is like, I'm running through this, and you kind of have these polarizing things where you've got the, all cops are bad, right? Where people are like, I don't care what it is, all cops are bad. And then you've got the back the blue, where these people are like, hey, we support law enforcement no matter what. It's like, yeah, but they just murdered some guy in cold blood on video. Back the blue. Like, I don't think most people fall into necessarily one of those extremes. But I think that there's some points that are there, right? Like if we look at the idea of law enforcement, not the reality of law enforcement, but the idea of law enforcement, right? That peace officer, where if there's a rapist in your community or a murderer at large, someone who's a violent person who's willing to harm other people, for you to put on a badge and a gun and put yourself in harm ways to protect your community, I think that idea is something that most people like the idea of. And I think that paying someone $40,000 a year to do that is kind of an insult, right? You're putting your life on the line. The problem is that you're paying $40,000 a year because cops have been turned into revenue generators, not only in this state, but in this country, where they're finding any little victimless activity that they can write you a citation for. So to protect the police, I say one thing: pay them what it's worth to put yourself on the line and potentially, die to a violent murderer out there. But we got to protect the public also. And that starts with ending all of the enforcement of victimless activities. If you are not harming somebody in some way, right? It's pretty clear. If you punch me in the face, you hurt me, right? You've harmed me. If I break into your house and steal your TV, I've harmed you, right? Like if there's a victim, I think that's what society wants us to be policing. The problem is, I can't say it, but I'm sure, DWB, I'm sure your listeners, that's a thing. I have Black friends. DWB is a thing. And in many cases, driving while black, right? That's a real thing that I have enough people tell me, hey, I got pulled over for absolutely no reason, and that has to stop.
In my case, SWB, standing while black.
Standing while black. But I mean, asking cops to enforce victimless activities, in my opinion, is completely immoral and antithetical to the liberty that we are supposed to represent as a free country. So you have to pay them what they're worth, but start of it will be stop doing all of this bad stuff, right? Stop finding this 18-year-old kid with a gram of weed and throwing him in a cage, making us spend thousands of dollars as taxpayers to do this. And he didn't hurt anybody, but that happens all the time in Gaston County. Like honestly not a 2 or 3 days go by that the Gastonia arrest inquiry doesn't have that exact arrest scenario happening every 2 or 3 days. Just follow it. If you do away with that, you are going to protect the cops, because some people are like, well, we have to do all of these Fourth Amendment violations because we don't know if that guy in the car has a gun, and all of these things in the eyes of officer safety. How about we help promote officer safety by minimizing the interactions with law enforcement and the public, and only have them create an interaction when there is a victim? And then we have to protect the public, because the reality is you still have someone out there with a gun and a badge. So things like qualified immunity, that has to end. The idea that because you have a gun and a badge, the government is going to protect you from liability of actions that you take is crazy.
That are clearly negligent.
Get rid of qualified immunity there, get rid of immunity at all levels. Honestly, I don't want to see immunity provided to big pharma companies or to environmental, like I don't want to see immunity being an option for government. But you have to end all of the other things. You got to end the drug war. You got to end civil asset forfeiture. You got to end all policing for profit and the profile. You have to do that to protect the public. And you have to change the culture, right? At the end of the day, if there's a cop who's going to blow the whistle on a bad cop who's abusing citizens, those are the guys that we need to be shouting as heroes, leading those forces, because it's the one profession that I feel like you can't have bad apples in. Otherwise, you're going to have this constant problem. So I think getting rid of their special protections and getting their mistakes off of the taxpayer. That's a bad one. Like, if with what happens in Gastonia, if the GPD ends up paying a big settlement over any of this, the GPD doesn't care. That's the people of Gastonia who are paying for it. Why are the taxpayers? So you got to require either at the officer level or the department level, private liability protection. Yes, either insurance or self-insure it from your pension fund, but you got to get that off of the taxpayer in the entirety, and you have to stop the enforcement of victimless activities, because the real impact that those have spans so far beyond just the person. It impacts their whole family, right? Where they get caught with some small victimless activity, walking through some guy's yard or whatever it may be. No one was really harmed. They get thrown in jail. Now their family's raising money to bail them out of jail, going through this. It spirals, and the fact that they over-police typically in lower income areas really just holds as an extra layer to keep the poor down. And I think the best thing that we can really strive for is to bring everybody out of that. Because if everybody's not worried about things like, hey, how am I going to keep a roof over my head? How am I going to get food in my belly? How am I going to keep the lights on and meet these basic needs? If you could actually solve that by empowering people, that's my approach, is empower people to climb out of that. Crime, all of these things will go down, because a lot of times, not all crime, there's some crazy people who just go out and murder people for no reason, but a lot of crime is a result of poverty and needs not being met. So we have to bring about those. And that's where I think ending this whole process where the law and the legal system perpetuates and keeps people in poverty. I've seen it so much with a lot of, the homeless activism that I do. There are homeless people who have have huge bills with their local government. Like, how hard, it's already so hard to get them out, to get them a job or anything else. You got to reform that system. And it starts by getting rid of every single protection that helps keep bad cops in place, and stop asking them to be essentially work for the politicians instead of the people. Because if they work for the people, I think
would like to interject. One thing I did not see, and this is kind of play on words, but you talk about qualified immunity and being able to get rid of the bad apples. Well, I think, with higher pay should come higher requirements. Yeah. Anybody who just got a GED should not just be able to become a police officer, because they take on a whole lot of responsibility, a whole lot of power.
Yes.
The state or municipality that they're representing when they put on that badge. And some of the standards across the country are just terribly low. And, for example, I believe it was Durham years ago, they used to require at least associate's degree, but I think the police union, don't quote me on it, but it's been a while since that story happened, but they, lobbied to get that requirement removed. I think that, people should have to undergo psychological battery tests. Just everything that you would put a person through, that, let's say they were going to get a top secret security clearance. I've been through that process in the United States military, just a full profile of this person to make sure this is the type of person who is not going to abuse, that power that's being granted to them. And then, like, when you watch a lot of the videos, like I share a lot of the videos on some of my different Facebook pages of cops simply not knowing the law, simply not knowing whether it's the state constitution, whether it's the federal constitution, not knowing basic stuff like the Fourth Amendment, not knowing that it's already case law that says I can record a cop in public. This has been settled law, and yet video after video after video, hundreds of these videos every year, possibly thousands of them, of cops not just simply not knowing the basics of law and what have you. So is that something you thought about? I mean, I didn't read that on your issues page, but I think that that's a big issue with why we have so much police brutality and violence in this country is low standards.
Yeah, no, and that's on my platform in the Protect the Police side. That's actually something I call for is mental health treatment, right? Where I look at the situation, and sorry if this tangent, but I think it's relevant. Where I look at the Joshua Aurora case, when that happened, and I saw that officer, I try to look at things from every angle before deciding my position on something. And one of the things that came to my mind is, well, what happened with this officer? And I look back, and a few years before that, he actually shot a guy at Buffalo Wild Wings, the same cop. And I watched that shoot, and that guy was in a mental health crisis, kind of similar to how, what Joshua went into when he had a PTSD episode. But I looked at that and I saw, wow, watching that video, and if I put myself in that same shoes, I would have shot. Because what do? He tried everything to de-escalate, but when someone points a gun, and draws it and points it, self-preservation as a human being kind of has to kick in if you're going to defend yourself rather than get shot. And I wonder, that's got to weigh on a human being to have to shoot another person, regardless of the outcome. I don't know what kind of.
You're not a psychopath.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what kind of mental health treatment did they have, right? Did he get nothing? And did he spend the next 3 years kind of dwelling on this? And did that impact his performance every single day that they, I feel like if someone has that, you have to give them the best quality mental health and healthcare treatment possible, because you cannot have unhinged, angry people who are not mentally stable out there representing the government and having a gun and a badge and interacting with citizens. It cannot happen. And part of me wonders, is that a failure? I don't know, because it's private medical record stuff, but it was a thought that came to mind.
I mean, but you can undergo again in the screening and hiring process. People, if they don't want to go through the stringent screening, then don't apply.
Find another job.
You have a choice, but I think people be interested in looking at Bernie Sanders, the progressive who campaigned for the Democratic Party, the last two primaries that they had, his Justice for All, where he talks about providing that same type of healthcare, mental health care for these officers, for the daily stresses that they have to go through. And but also, I'm also thinking about it is the fact that police families have occurrences of domestic violence. These cops
40%.
making batteries against their spouses and other family members at a couple of years ago. What was that? 4 times the rate of the general public. So
40%. 40% of all. 40% of all officers are involved in domestic, according to that survey.
That's a pretty large percentage, of people. And then, so it translates to me, the logic would stand that, hey, if they don't mind beating on their significant other and family members, then they certainly wouldn't mind, if they get triggered, beating up a citizen.
100%. I mean, yeah, if 40% of them are willing to hit their own partner, what percent's willing to hit somebody they don't know? That's the scary thing when you really think about it, right? 40% are willing to not only hit their partner, but admit it in a survey. Like hit 40% that number. What's the percent that's willing to violate someone's right because they got their feelings hurt? Right? Where someone says something smart to a cop and then that cop just loses it. Like if I said something smart and you just beat the heck out of me, I might get justice. But if I said something smart and you were a cop and you beat the heck out of me, I'd probably have to spend $30,000 to get evidence of you beating the crap out of me, and you probably still wouldn't be held accountable. And we got to stop that. Like we really have to stop that. And I think the way to do it is if you give them a pay raise, to make it more appealing to someone who to come in, right, and say, hey, this is a dangerous job, but now it's a salary level that's there. Have really good ways to hold them accountable, right? And I think the free market insurance can somewhat do that, right? Where if you have one officer who has a bad situation, does something wrong, gets sued, well, their rating goes up. Eventually, they're going to be uninsurable, and now they're out of a job, right? Because if no insurance company is going to, okay, it sucks that it takes a couple of bad actions to root them out, right? But if you do things right and you ask them, take away all of the things that they use to go fishing, right? Take away all those things to go fishing and the incentive to find just anything and really get them back to that idea of protecting and serving, trying to seek justice for victims, right? Not just, I smell weed, so I'm going to tear up your car, right? Like that has to stop statewide. Like if you can't name who the victim is, you don't need to be talking to that person because they're having an interaction.
I want to bring up a local case before we move on to different topic, but this is still dealing with law enforcement, transparency, excessive force, everything we've been touching upon in the past 10 minutes. But the shooting death of Jason Lipscomb has raised questions about excessive force and transparency in these types of cases involving law enforcement. And I want to ask, in your opinion, why are Gaston County elected leaders so quiet about his case and other issues involving civil rights in the county and city of Gastonia? For example, I saw the video from a Gastonia City Council meeting where you and another gentleman whose name escapes me right now, but you spoke out on possible 14th Amendment violations right there on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, where Black protesters were treated differently than white protesters by the sheriff's department. And I noticed that in that video, nobody ever responded, but that seems to be typical. Even when I went to the county commissioner meetings, they typically never respond to the citizens who ask questions during the citizen recognition period. But my question to you is, how would you address such well, I mean, why do you think they're quiet? Now, you think it's because the city may be liable for damages and they're just trying not to speak on a case because they don't want to see the city have to pay? I don't know if I'm saying that in a way you can understand.
Yeah, no, I got you. Yeah, no, I think I got it. I think this would be a lot easier question to answer if we could see the body cam footage. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, this would be a lot easier question to answer if we could see the body cam footage, because if the body, I don't want to speculate because you can get in trouble if you speculate and it eventually comes out. But if the body cam footage says what some people have suggested, and honestly, what some of the evidence, again, circumstantial
video of me just standing on the street and those Black protesters being.
Well, that one was clear, but I mean, I think, I'd love to see the body cam footage of what happened to Jason, and if it showed there, I would be out there rallying again. If it shows what it may show, and I think, here they fought real hard to stop Joshua's footage from coming out, and that footage showed exactly what they were claiming. It would not be surprising if the video does show what some people are claiming. I would not be remotely surprised that they are doing everything in their power to try to cover it up, because if it was those last two shots, right? That's kind of the one that I think really is the the driving
Right,
home where
right.
those two
Where the
those
two
two
shell
casings.
casings are located about 100 yards away from where the police initially started shooting at the fleeing vehicle that he was driving. But I mean, it's certainly, now we just passed the 1-year anniversary of that shooting, and yet, you know, the district attorney, Travis Page, as far as we know, is still quote unquote investigating this. But while the cops and the public with getting no information, the cops have quietly been, you know, been cleared for duty. But
Really?
yet Page hasn't made a decision, nor has you know, nobody's seen any videotape.
I mean, that's kind of there's so much wrong with that case, but I think that really comes down to why the body cam footage reform is so essential in this state, and why I think, you know, again, if you
I'm sure Travis Page has access to it.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
sure he's seen it.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's seen it, but you know, that's what makes me wonder, right? Like the last case that I got involved with fighting for body cam footage on, the body cam footage showed exactly what the victim said it did.
Mhm.
Right? It showed exactly what the victim said it did, and the city fought damn hard to prevent it from being blocked. You know, I would love to see what happened. I think it's a travesty that the community and Jason's family hasn't gotten to see what happened to their child. That is a travesty to me, that the government has video evidence explaining what happened to your child. As a parent, that's the kind, like, I'm a libertarian who's a very peaceful person. I believe in, you know, I'm against violence of all sorts, but that's the kind of thing that would really like drive me if I was trying to figure out what happened to my kid, and the government had video evidence of what happened to my kid and told me, you can't have this. I can't imagine what that family is going through. And I think that we got to reform the body cam footage, whether I win governor or not. We have to, as North Carolinians, we have to reform that so that no other family has to go through what Joshua went through, what Jason's family is still going through, what so many other North Carolinians in every single county of this state are going through. We have to do that, because this should be easy justice. Look at the camera. Did the cops execute him? If so, get rid of people who executed him, period. No question. Don't draw it out. It should be swift. It should be immediate. The public sees this. And if you shoot an unarmed person who is not a threat, you need to have your badge stripped and you need to be put in jail, period. I'm sorry. I just think that we have to get to the bottom that situation, the whole way it went down at that point, if I have the facts of the case straight, like there was no immediate threat to anyone. At this point, I believe the kids were recovered, accounted for. They had his address. Like, there was no need to go through this high-speed chase and shoot firearms in a residential community with kids out. Like, all of that has to stop. The no-knock raids. Like, there's just so much about it that we have to fix, and we have to do it in a way that protects the public.
All right, I just got a couple of more questions regarding, and we talked a little bit about taxation, but want to, you know, give you opportunity to delve deeper into your peace through prosperity, but also, you know, environment. How do you plan to protect North Carolina's natural beauty? But I want to take another station identification break. You're listening to Black Talk Radio News with Scotty Reid. I am he. It is part of the Black Talk Radio Network. You can find us online at blacktalkradionetwork.com. You can also find us on just about every major podcasting platform. If you want to listen to the latest podcast of Black Talk Radio Network, just say, Alexa, play the latest podcast from Black Talk Radio Network. And she should pull it up on Amazon Music. Or if you want to listen to the digital radio station, whether it's a playlist or it's streaming live content like we're doing right now, then you just say, Alexa, pull up Black Talk Radio Network on TuneIn, and it should pull up the live station stream or the digital radio station stream. Again, if you would like to support some of our efforts, particularly you can give to my favorite charity, again, which is blacktalkmediaproject.org, which is a North Carolina-based nonprofit media company that's involved in educating the people on media technology, as well as providing services. So we're talking to Mike Ross, Gaston County resident who is running for North Carolina governor in this upcoming election. But right now he's in a primary fight to earn the right to represent the Libertarians. So again, important information, if you're an unaffiliated voter, which seems to be the group that he is targeting the most, you're an unaffiliated voter and not part of what he calls the uni-party in North Carolina, you can pick and choose which primary ballot you want to vote if you're an unaffiliated registered voter. So moving on, Mike, now you propose significant changes to North Carolina's taxation system. We talked a little bit about, some of your thoughts on it earlier, but you have a plan called Peace Through Prosperity. How do you see this impacting the state's economy and the well-being of its residents?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I want to get the government out of everybody's wallet as much as humanly possible, especially people who are struggling, right? Regular people who are paycheck to paycheck or, kind of middle class down, right? I want to get the government out of your wallet as much as humanly possible, and not only get out of your wallet, but get out of your way economically, right? So it comes down to any sort of these taxes or fees or all of these things that were laid in, right? Why do we have to pay a registration fee for our car every year? You go buy a brand new car, what, you can't register it for 5 years of the life of the car? You have to have this every single year fee, all these layers. I want to do away with as many of those as possible, especially the ones that are really providing no benefit, right? There's some taxes and things in every municipality's budget for like the ABC Commission, right? Which is the liquor store. Why the heck don't we just have liquor stores that are owned by North Carolinians like other states? Instead, we have this whole system that we, the taxpayers, have to fund jobs. I want to get away with all of the taxes that are going to things that impact people, not at the high level, especially not right away, right? It needs to be gradual. But what I want people to be lifted out of prosperity and get all of these barriers to prosperity out of the way. One of the greatest things that a person can do, which I remember when you kind of did it with your car detailing business, right? Like starting a business and going out there and building something is not only a good economic decision, but it builds character, it builds work ethic. It's something that's good for you. The problem is that the government puts so many barriers in the way for a regular small person to even start doing something. In some cases, they have like occupational licensing for certain things, right? Mm-hmm. Like,
something as simple as braiding hair.
Braiding hair. Why do you need the government's permission to braid someone's hair? Like if they do a good job and they come to you and they're like, okay, yeah, your place is clean and you do a good job and you don't hurt my head that much. Like, I want to pay you money and you braid, like, they have these occupational licensing schemes in so many ways. And eventually what it's doing is just limiting the competition, where it's like, hey, I've got a hair braiding shop. Well, what if I don't do a good job and that person down the street maybe does a better job, but they don't have the money to put in the classes to take 2,000 hours so that they could even come compete with me? I want to get every barrier that the state of North Carolina that it puts in front of regular people and prevents them from elevating their own economic status. I want to tear those down. If it's something that is limiting competition and making it harder for someone to enter into any industry, all that's doing is stifling competition. And I am a radical free market believer, right? Like I truly think that that the free market is the best way to solve these problems and get the government out of it. And really, they should be effectively more just a referee than a key player, right? Where if a company or something is doing something shady, absolutely hold them accountable. Sadly, what the government of North Carolina is doing is basically blocking out competition to hand things to, VinFast, an electric car, so many real estate developers that are these big. We got to get that out of there, because if we get rid of all of these things that both Republicans and Democrats support, none of them are going to end occupational licensing and make it easier for a regular person to start a business, regardless of what they say. I will. And I'm the only candidate that really will do that on the ballot. So peace through prosperity is all about that, right? Do anything that the government is doing that is making it harder for prosperity to happen, stop doing that. Whether it's the police reform element of getting people out of that criminal, that trap of the criminal justice system being an economic terrorist act upon people, because that's what it is. It's economic terrorism when they're doing it in some of these low-income communities where they're finding any reason to just put you into this system. And it's economic terrorism to me, and it happens across here. We got to get rid of that. And if you give people liberty, and get rid of those barriers, I think that we can elevate things. It's really the kind of the culmination of all of my platforms. It really is all about how do we get more of the money being pushed downward so that the decision-making with dollars is being done at the individual level where possible, at the local level where that's not possible, and really trying to have less centralized power and much more power being pushed down to the people themselves or the municipalities if it's not really practical to come all the way down to the individual level.
Last question, and it's regarding the environment, because we live in what I feel like certain parts of our county is very beautiful, in terms of the topography, the landscape, especially an area on Old Highway 27, which is really some of the land has been set aside by as a Rankin family preserve, to protect wildlife or provide for, a habitat, because with all the development you've been mentioning, even on that road, Old Highway 27 in Gaston County, man, we're starting to see so much wildlife, like, losing their habitat. And we're starting to see them more like coyotes. I've been seeing coyotes. There was a bear that was asleep on somebody's lawn at a trailer park down the road. And so I'm not the only one that's seeing a lot of animals being displaced, it seems, by development. But regarding the environment, how do you plan to protect North Carolina's natural beauty while allowing for free market solutions? Can you give an example of a potential innovative solution that might thrive in this environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first thing I will do at the highest level is I'm going to do something extremely different from both Republicans and Democrats, who are completely the uni-party on this issue. I am not going to protect polluters at all. I will not protect polluters, despite the fact that the uni-party does that time and time again in this state and every other state. If you are responsible for any sort of environmental disaster, you will not have a cap or a limit on how much you will have. And honestly, I think if we're really enabling the free market, I think it's perfectly reasonable that if we make an initiative at the state level and say we will punish very harshly anyone who damages the environment, especially recklessly. And I would encourage every municipality, as these investors are coming in, I think the real solution to protecting the environment is going to come down to risk mitigation and insurance. So if a municipality, right, I live in Cramerton, if some factory wants to come in and they want to put a factory right by the South Fork River, and they buy the land and they're looking to do that, what I think would be reasonable is for my town commissioners to go in there and say, okay, well, what are you doing? And call in someone, an outside risk, and say, hey, what is the actual risk to our environment and our economy if this factory pollutes our waterways? And if they come back and they have their actuaries do some numbers, then they say, okay, it's potentially a $3 billion potentially $3 billion worth of damage if something goes wrong. I think that the municipality should be able to say to that company, hey, we're going to let you set up your factory here, but you have to maintain $3 billion of insurance against this at all times, because we are not.
You're talking about doing a risk assessment.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have risk assessment, but which in some cases they do risk assessments now. The problem is they'll do the risk assessment and say, hey, there's some risk here. But then they'll give them liability protection where it's like, okay, you could make $5 billion in damage if something goes wrong, but we're going to cap your liability at $1 billion. Okay, yeah, you get $1 billion from them, but the taxpayers are paying the other $4 billion. You can't protect liability of any company that's doing that. And I think when it comes to personal things, like personal ones, right? Say I live in a townhouse community, right? But say I lived in, a single family home and had a yard and I had a neighbor. Right. If I have chickens, for example, and I'm taking my chicken crap and shoveling it into my neighbor's yard, like that's the kind of thing we should have things to protect against that. But as far as something like, hey, if you buy the land, and it's your land, I think we need to if it's a person, right, I don't want to tell somebody, hey, you have the land, you can't cut down some trees to build yourself a house. I think that's kind of un-American to say, if you went and bought a land, some land next to where your house is, and you're like, hey, I'm going to bulldoze a half acre of trees and build a house here. I really don't want the government getting involved in that. But if a big developer who's not even from North Carolina, some California REIT comes over.
For example, just another example, because this actually happened. We have some land that's collectively owned by our large family, and they sold the trees. You know what I'm saying? Sold the pine trees, let a company come in and farm the trees. And I get that the county should not have had any say on what, we did with that land.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to strike a balance, right? Because I don't want the government dictating it. But my bigger problem, because you doing that, right? You doing that with your family's personal land, right, that you own. That's not really the big environmental problem. The big environmental problem is coming from these big real estate developers, these chemical companies, these mining companies. And I think that those are the environmental issues that really, your neighbor who's pouring some waste into the stream, right? That's bad. And we should stop him. And if we catch that, that's bad. But one guy who's throwing a bag of trash in the river is nothing compared to what happens if something goes wrong over at Duke Energy.
Right. Coal ash ponds. We don't have to imagine if something go wrong. Stuff has gone wrong.
I'm trying to be, a little nicer and not call out Piedmont Lithium and so some of these other, companies. But I think that comes down to it is, if you want to do business in North Carolina, we want you to. We believe, I believe in free markets. However, we are not going to be exploited by some big corporation outside of North Carolina. It's not going to happen where they come in here, take advantage of our resources, whether there are our human resources, the people of North Carolina, our natural resources. That's not going to happen. If you're going to put our state at risk, you are going to carry appropriate liability insurance that more than protects the actual potential damage. If not, you're not going to move forward with a project in this state, especially not one of these big ones. At least if I'm governor, again, you want to bring a big business here to North Carolina, that's fine. I'm just going to make sure that you are doing everything possible to protect the interests of North Carolinians and the communities around there. Because if, I think it was Ohio where Norfolk Southern had some massive environmental disaster where they set like a derailed train on fire and, there was like oil in the water for miles. Norfolk Southern had federal government granted liability, like this massive disaster that's impacting drinking water. And I think they were capped at like $100 million or something like that. Wow. That should not happen. And I think that would be one thing that, I haven't mentioned it in this one, but the governor of North Carolina should be protecting North Carolinians from things the federal government does. Like if you really think through the idea, if the federal government is overstepping, which I think they overstep in a lot of ways. I'd love to see the states fight back. And in some cases they have, right? California and Colorado with cannabis, right? The federal government said it was illegal and they said, get out of here. It's our state. And I think that concept of nullification, where if the federal government is trying to do something that's against the interests of your state, I think that the governor should be fighting for the people of North Carolina, not fighting for that system that's trying to make victims of North Carolinians. So I'd love to see kind of reversing that power where instead of kind of, where you've got the top down check, checking the power, I'd love to see it bottom up where, if I'm governor and I do something that, Mount Holly doesn't like, if the Mount Holly Town Council says, we don't like this, we're just going to stick with, we're just going to nullify this law that Mike, that's kind of the system working as intended, is more direct democracy. And I'd love to see nullification. And I think that, that's one thing as a governor, I would fight back really in a way that no other governor ever would, is really fighting for anything that's the federal government's doing that's going to hurt the regular North Carolinian. I'm just going to say, we're not going to enforce that in our state, period. So.
All right, Mike. Well, I want to first thank you for accepting the invitation to come on Black Talk Radio News. And I hope it won't be the last time that we can call on you to talk about the issues. But do you have any final thoughts for our listeners tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I guess let me close with kind of the closing pitch.
Please tell people where to find your campaign website. We have linked to it in the show description on blacktalkradionetwork.com, but you might want to mention it for the people that's listening via other means.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you like what I had to say, or you're curious, you could head to my website. It's firetheuniparty.com, firetheuniparty.com. And that'll give you information, all of my planks, my background. But as as far as the offer to come back anytime, Scotty, I'd love the opportunity to chat with your audience. But if you are an unaffiliated voter in this state, both Robinson and Stein, you may like one more than the other. But here's what I'll tell you, and I truly mean this from the bottom of my heart. They both work for Washington and not for you. They're going to do whatever their party tells them to do, whatever it is, whether it's in your best interest or not. I do not work for that establishment. I will never work for that establishment. And I will always put personal liberty and freedom first. And that is my overwhelming philosophy. So I think if you are looking for a change, if you think that criminal justice and prison reform is something that matters to you, I am the only candidate that really means it. Josh Stein likes to talk a good game, but when we were sending him letters when this was going on, he was ignoring them. I don't know if Jason's families have reached out to Josh Stein, but I would encourage them to. He's the Attorney General. He should care. He should be helpful. He claims to care about justice. So, I would encourage his family to reach out to him, and hopefully they get better results. But when we sent that out, he ignored them. And I will not ignore you as governor. If something is going on and you are wronged by an employee of this state, if I am the head of this state, I will seek justice for you. And I will not be too tied up in the role of governor, because at the end of the day, I believe the governor's first and foremost job is to protect, defend, and uphold the rights of every North Carolinian. And that is exactly what I'll do if elected.
All right. That's Mike Ross. And the website again is firetheuniparty.com. Firetheuniparty.com. You can also look him up on the other social media platforms. Again, thank you once again, Mike. And you have a great evening and good luck with your campaign.
Thanks so much, Scotty. Appreciate it. And thanks to all your listeners.
And with that, we will say good night as we sign off from Black Talk Radio News, again, part of blacktalkradionetwork.com. Again, share the podcast with others. And if there's any issues that you think I should take a look at on this platform, please let me know. Peace and blessings to all. Good night.